Hi all, you're very welcome to another Saturday session here at ExamRevision.ie. My name is John, and today we're going to be looking at food exam paper questions that have appeared in the Leaving Cert Biology paper in past years. We're going to be going through the different types of questions that may appear, the breakdown of the questions, and trying to increase our understanding and our interpretation of the question. Food appears pretty much every single year as question 1 on the exam paper, and therefore if we have a good understanding of the topic of food and a good understanding of how to answer the exam paper questions, it'll set us up nicely for the rest of the paper. So hopefully come the end of this lesson, we'll have a much clearer understanding of how to answer our food questions that will appear in this year's exam. The first question we're going to look at is the question that came up in the 2022 paper. And again, food appeared as question 1 in this particular year, and there's a distinct pattern that we could recognize with food over previous exam papers in biology. Food generally appears as question 1 in the paper, and it sets us up nicely for the rest of the paper. What we're going to look at first of all is the reading of the question, and a key mistake that students make in biology is not taking the time to understand the question and what it's actually asking you. In biology, you will have plenty of time to complete this paper. You will have extra time at the end of the paper, so use this time wisely to read the question prior to answering it. So this first question that came up in 2022, it tells us to answer any of the following parts, any of the 5 of the following parts A to F. Now this generally, to a student who is unaware of what they have to do, they will only answer 5. What you're going to do is you're going to answer A to F. We know that that is 6 different parts, but you are going to be asked to answer 5. You're going to be marked on 5 on your best 5. So if you answer 6, you get 1 wrong but 5 right, you will get full marks. If you answer 6 and you get 6 of them correct, you will get full marks. So we have a bit of a buffer here. We have a bit of leeway here that we may get 1 wrong, we will still get full marks. So even though the question says answer 5, you're going to answer all parts of these questions because you will be marked on your best 5. So we're going to go through the questions now, take our time and break down what we're actually being asked. So the first question, this particular question, focuses on protein, the question that came up in this year's exam paper. So name the 4 elements that are found in all proteins. Now, a key part of this question we need to underline is all proteins. Because there's 4 elements that are found in all proteins, but there's an additional 2 elements that may be found in proteins. So the elements that we would associate with protein are CHON, and we're going to put in brackets P and S. And when you learned your 6 most common elements in food, you would have learned that CH and O are in carbs and lipids, CHON are in proteins, and sometimes P and S in proteins. So the 4 elements that are found in every single protein is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in every single protein. And again, it's very important that we read the question and we again highlight that they're asking for 4. So we do not put down the 6 elements that may be found in proteins. So really important we take our time to read the question. Name an element that is only sometimes found in proteins. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen are always found. So therefore the 2 elements we're going to look at is P and S, phosphorus and sulfur. And I'm going to go with sulfur, and that's my element that is only sometimes found within proteins. The next question relates to how many common amino acids are found in proteins. And this question does come up and has appeared regularly on papers over the last number of years. And the simple answer for this is that there is 20 common amino acids. You do not need to explain this. You just simply need to know this figure, that there's 20 common amino acids found in proteins. Part D is focusing on fibrous proteins. And fibrous proteins have structural roles within living organisms. Now, when we're talking about a structural role of a protein, this refers to a protein that is playing some sort of role in making up of a bodily structure. So, for example, the protein that we would have learned that has a structural role makes up our hair, our nails, and our skin. It is actually playing a role in part of our body structures. Whereas if we look at the next question, a metabolic role, that's not playing a role to make up any structure in the body. It's playing a role within metabolism, within some of the bodily processes that are happening. So for example, when we're looking at structural, we're talking about a structural role of the walls in a house or to hold up the ceiling. So the walls have a structural role there. The windows have a structural role within the actual house. So we're going to focus on the one fibrous protein or the one structural protein that we learned, and that was keratin, which is found in the hair and the nails. And we only need to name it. We don't need to actually give where we find it, because they're only simply asking to name, and we only want to answer what they're actually asking us. Okay, so keratin. One metabolic role of proteins, again, question is associated with proteins. So metabolic role, how does protein play a role in some sort of bodily process that happens within our bodies? There's a few different answers we can give here, and hopefully you're coming up with one of them. And the one I always stick with is enzymes. Enzymes control metabolism. They're catalysts that speed up the rate of reaction, and they are made of protein. Hopefully there you're thinking to yourself, you could also give antibodies, which obviously play a role in the human defense system, and you could also give your example of hormones, which send chemical messages around the body. The last question is concerned with one good source of protein in the diet. So source means where are we actually getting protein from in our diet? So what type of food are we going to eat to get a high protein intake? And I always go with the one that comes straight to my head, which is chicken or meat. You could also say obviously your eggs or your nuts, but I would go with my chicken, my high protein food. And that concludes the 2022 question 1 that came up this year on food. And hopefully, as we went through that question, you were understanding what we've been asked and you're able to answer most of them yourself. So we're going to take a look now at the marking scheme and what will be accepted for a question like this. So just taking a quick look through the marking scheme, again, you can see the 4 elements that are found in all proteins, the CH, O, and N, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. The 2 elements that are sometimes found in proteins, we only need to give one. And when it says name an element, pretend there's a 1 on top of that. Name one element that is sometimes found in proteins. And the reason for that is, if you were to write down phosphorus and sodium, phosphorus would be correct, but sodium would be incorrect. And an incorrect answer would cancel out the correct. So if it says name a or name an, we're going to pretend that there's a 1 on top of that. So we name one element. We don't give both. Because if one is wrong, you're going to lose the marks. How many common amino acids are found in proteins? There's 20. Name any one fibrous protein. The one we would have studied in most detail is keratin. One metabolic role of proteins. Again, the go-to answer for me would be enzymes. And one good source of protein in the diet. And again, use your discretion there, but I would stick to your meat or your chicken. And notice that there's 4 marks going for each of these questions. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Your 24 is just showing that if you get one of these wrong, you'll get the other 4 marks here. The total number for this question here is 20 marks. So you get 5 right, and each of them are worth 4 marks. Next question we're going to look at is 2021, and again notice that this question appeared as question number 1 on this particular paper. Again, it's a similar style to the previous question we looked at, and they're asking us to answer any 5 of the following parts A to F. Of course, A to F again is 6 parts, but we're going to answer all 6 and will be marked on the best 5. Again, we're going to take our time and really understand what we've been asked. So identify one difference between fats and oils at room temperature. So a fat and an oil, how do they differ at room temperature? So I want you to think of your butter and your sunflower oil and what's different between them at room temperature. And hopefully you're concluding that a fat at room temperature is a solid, and oil at room temperature is a liquid. Again, that's the only difference you need to give between both. Just refer to its state at particular temperature. In this case, it's room temperature. The next question is focusing on fats again. So a lipid, otherwise known as a fat, and there's 2 types, triglycerides and phospholipids. Again, we're going to take our time to understand what we've been asked, and we're asked to give one difference between a triglyceride and a phospholipid. I'm going to use a highlighter here to indicate just a couple of things. So when we look at that word triglyceride, we're going to highlight the tri part of that. So we're going to highlight the fact that this word says tri. And in phospholipid, we're going to highlight the phos part, the phospho part. And that's going to hopefully inform us that there is a difference between both of these and that we will get to the bottom of this difference. So trimin and tri, if a tricycle is referred to, if a bike is referred to as a tricycle, it has 3 wheels. So a triglyceride has what we call 3 fatty acids. We're going to just put this down. So triglyceride has 3 fatty acids. I'm just going to put down Fa for a fatty acid. This triglyceride has 3 fatty acids. Whereas a phospholipid, hopefully you're recalling that a phospholipid has 2 fatty acids. So phospholipid has 2 fatty acids. And there's your difference that you need to give, 2 fatty acids. You can also give a difference that the phospholipid, and I underline the phospho part, the phospholipid also has a phosphate. So I can add in here as well 2 fatty acids and a phosphate. The triglyceride does not have a phosphate. So if we're looking at the basic structure of a triglyceride, it is 3 fatty acids connected to a glycerol, whereas in a phospholipid, we have 2 fatty acids, a phosphate connected to a glycerol. Identify one metabolic role for lipids in cells. Again, that word metabolic is coming up. So this is one way in which a lipid is playing a role in metabolism, is playing a role in some sort of bodily process. So lipids, we know we would take in for energy. So our metabolic role for lipids is energy release. And that's, of course, going to play a role in respiration. So energy release. The next question is identifying a fat-soluble vitamin. And again, it's given one fat-soluble vitamin. So we only give one, regardless of how many we actually know. So we needed to know a fat-soluble vitamin and a water-soluble vitamin. And when we're talking about water-soluble vitamin, a nice way to remember your water-soluble one was we're thinking water. We're thinking, where would we find water? We find water in the sea. So our water-soluble vitamin is vitamin C. So therefore, our fat-soluble vitamin that we have studied is vitamin D. A disorder associated with a deficiency of the vitamin that we're after naming. A deficiency means a lack of. So if we have a lack of vitamin D in our diet, what disorder can arise that is associated with a lack of this vitamin? There's two disorders we could associate with this particular vitamin D. And the one we would have learned for children is rickets. And that's the one I would go with. It's the easier word to spell, and you can't really make a mistake when we're talking about rickets. Of course, you could also put down your osteomalacia, and that's in adults. That's a disorder that can arise in adults that is associated with a lack of vitamin D. Name one element present in dissolved salts in food. So our dissolved salts are elements that are found in dissolved salts. We've 5 of them. And the 5 elements that are present as dissolved salts in the diet are sodium, magnesium, calcium, chlorine, and potassium. So we can give either of them as our answer. And again, they're only asking for one element that is present. So I would literally just give one element. So I'm going to give sodium, Na. And I'll just write down the name as well. So sodium. And again, with this question, we've a wee bit of buffer. We've a wee bit of leeway in that we could get one part of this question wrong and still get 20 marks out of 20. Again, 20 marks going for this particular paper. Just looking through the marking scheme from that particular question. Again, notice that they're saying the best 5 answers are going to be marked from A to F. Again, the best 5, 4 marks for each part that you answer correctly. So what they're looking for a difference between fats and oils. Fats are solid at room temperature, oils are liquid. Identify one difference between a triglyceride and a phospholipid. Tri meaning 3 has 3 fatty acids, whereas a phospholipid has only 2 fatty acids. A triglyceride has no phosphate, whereas a phospholipid has a phosphate. So again, look at that word phospho that we see within phospholipid, and that informs us that it has a phosphate, whereas a triglyceride does not have a phosphate. Identify one metabolic role for lipids. It's an energy source. Name one fat-soluble vitamin in the diet. Again, the one we looked at was vitamin D. And a disorder associated with a lack of vitamin D is rickets. Or, of course, we could use osteomalacia in adults. One element that's present in dissolved salts. So, again, we have a number of elements that we could give. I would just go with one element, and we go with sodium. We're going to look at the 2020 paper now. Again, notice that the 2020 paper, question number 1 was again food. The question follows a similar style to the previous 2 questions, where we answer any 5 of the following parts. So again, we're going to answer all 6. So part A is asking you to give an example of a trace element in the human diet. Again, it is asking us for one example. So we do not give 2 examples. In this case, we could give one of possibly 3 elements. So we could give iron, copper, or zinc. There are 3 trace elements. And our trace elements are elements that we require in tiny amounts in the diet. So I'm just going to pick iron as my example. the 3 chemical elements found in all lipids. So we're thinking about the periodic table. What 3 elements in that periodic table are found in all lipids or fats? And they're the exact same elements that are found in carbohydrates. So the 3 elements found in all lipids are carbon, hydrogen, and of course, last but not least, oxygen. And do not get mixed up with protein in this case, because there's 4 elements found in all protein, whereas in lipids, we've got the 3 elements, so carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The next question is referring to lipids, but the basic unit that makes up lipids. So if we're thinking about our building blocks of lipids, we're thinking about our fatty acids and our glycerol. So in this case, the basic unit, so 3 fatty acids. In the exam, you're going to write fatty acids. I'm just doing this for speed. So 3 fatty acids and the glycerol. And just be careful that you don't refer to glycerol as glyceride and get mixed up with the triglyceride. Glycerol is the unit. The next question is talking about respiration, and it's referring to metabolic pathways. So the metabolic pathways refers to the type of metabolism essentially. So respiration is an example of a metabolic pathway in organisms. What type of metabolic pathway is in question? So when we look at metabolism, we're going to use the acronym CRAP, C-R-A-P. And this will help us remember an example of a catabolic reaction and an example of an anabolic reaction. So CRAP, the C stands for catabolic, the R stands for respiration, the A stands for anabolic, and the P stands for photosynthesis. So the type of metabolic pathway that respiration represents is a catabolic pathway. Because in respiration, of course, glucose is broken down to release energy, and we get our carbon dioxide and our water produced. So respiration is a catabolic process. What is meant by the term polysaccharide? And again, we're going to underline the question, in particular the words poly. Poly means many in many different contexts in the English language. So when we're talking about poly, we mean many, and a saccharide is a sugar unit. So you would recognize saccharide from monosaccharide, meaning 1 sugar unit, disaccharide, meaning 2 sugar units. So polysaccharide means many sugar units. And that's all you simply need to say. The last part of the question we're going to look at is name a storage polysaccharide in animals. Really important that we highlight that they're asking about animals here. They're also talking about storage. They're not talking about structural. They're not talking about plants. So we would know 3 polysaccharides. We need to know a structural polysaccharide in plants, which is cellulose. We need to know a storage polysaccharide in plants, which is starch. And we also need to know a storage polysaccharide found in animals. And hopefully you've concluded that the storage polysaccharide found in animals is called glycogen, which is a store of glucose in the human body. And glycogen is found in the muscle and the liver in the human body. But that's all you need to say, because again, they're just asking you for the name. So hopefully you approach this question with a wee bit more confidence after the last 2 questions. And when we went through that question there, you're able to answer the majority of the question. Again, our marking scheme will guide us and inform us as to whether we will get the marks for this particular question. A couple of wee pieces just to refer to within this marking scheme. Again, we're looking for one example. We give one example. Name the chemical elements found in all lipids: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The basic unit that makes up all lipids. So your 3 fatty acids connected to a glycerol, or they will also accept a triglyceride as being your basic unit of a lipid. Respiration is an example of a catabolic reaction, because respiration is breaking down of glucose. So catabolic is the breaking down of larger molecules into smaller. What is a polysaccharide? Polysaccharide is many sugar units. And a storage polysaccharide, the only one we would have studied, storage polysaccharide in animals, is glycogen. The storage polysaccharide in plants is starch. And again, that question there is going to rely on us taking our time to understand that we've been asked about a storage polysaccharide, but in animals. Starch is not in animals. So we need to do a process of elimination. It's not cellulose, it's not starch, so therefore it must be glycogen. The last question we're going to go through today is the 2019 paper, question 1. And again, we recognize that it's a very similar layout to previous questions, where we're answering 5 of the following parts, A to F. First question is asking us to state the 2 main reasons why food is required by living things. We need to be really careful to take into account what they're actually asking us. So they're asking us, why do we need to take in food? For what purpose is food required by living things? The first purpose is energy. We need food for energy. Without energy, we will not survive, because energy is required for all bodily processes. And the second reason why we need food is for growth and repair. And growth and repair is constantly happening within our body to replace and repair existing cells, but also to produce new cells. So growth and repair. The next question is asking us about the ratio of hydrogen atoms to oxygen atoms in a carbohydrate. Now this is a very interesting question, because instead of them asking you for the general formula of a carb, so the general formula of a carb is CX bracket H2O bracket Y. That's the general formula for carbohydrates. So essentially they're asking you to interpret this general formula of carbohydrates and answer the question. So what's the ratio of hydrogen atoms to oxygen? They've put hydrogen first, which means you must put hydrogen first like that. Or the hydrogen atoms you must put first, and then you have your oxygen. So what way are we going to write that? If we look at that general formula for carbohydrates, we have twice as many hydrogen as we do oxygen. So if you think about glucose as an example of a carbohydrate, Glucose's chemical formula is C6H12O6. And again, recognize that we've 12 hydrogens compared to 6 oxygens. So we always have twice as many hydrogens we do oxygens. So our answer there would be 2:1, putting the hydrogen first. Our next question is looking now for a structural role of lipids in cells. So within the cell, we want to give a structural role of lipids. So what you would have learned right back looking at cell structure and also within food is that the part of a lipid is responsible for forming part of the cell membrane. And that's your structural role for lipids. So it forms part of the cell membrane. The next question is asking for a metabolic role of lipids in cells. And again, this was asked in a previous exam paper that we looked at. And our answer again is the same as if we were asked for a metabolic role of carbs in cells: energy store, energy release. The next question is asking for an example of a fat-soluble vitamin. Again, we needed to know 2 types of vitamins: a water-soluble vitamin and a fat-soluble vitamin. Our fat-soluble vitamin that we looked at was vitamin D. So simply put vitamin D, because you're only asked for an example, which again, we're not going to imagine that there's an imaginary 1 above that. Name a disorder associated with a deficiency of this particular vitamin. Again, with vitamin D deficiency, we're looking at rickets as our answer, because they're not specifying whether it's in adults or children, so we can just give rickets. But you could also give osteomalacia, and they're the 2 answers that we could give for vitamin D deficiency. Just taking a look through a marking scheme of the 2019 question 1 question. 2 reasons why food is necessary. So we need food for energy and we need it for growth and repair. The ratio of hydrogen to oxygen and carbs is 2:1. Remember your CX bracket H2O bracket Y. That's your general formula, which informs us that we always have twice as many hydrogens as we do to oxygens in carbohydrates. This is not the case in lipids. There is no set ratio of atoms in lipids. The structural role of lipids in cells forms part of the cell membrane. Metabolic role for lipids in cells is an energy source or release or storage. Our fat-soluble vitamin that we looked at was vitamin D, and a disorder associated with a lack of vitamin D was our osteomalacia or our rickets in children. That concludes a breakdown of examination paper questions that have come up on food over the previous years gone by. Constant repetition and exam paper practice is vital in order to gain a good understanding of the type of questions that are asked, particularly on food. As mentioned previously, food appears pretty much every year as question 1 on the paper, so it is a really important topic to try and nail before our mocks and before our Leaving Cert exams. Just before I leave you, just a reminder to follow us on social media. On the screen, we've got a number of different social media handles, and we would appreciate any follows.